Lord Aldrich Vane had watched women board trains in distress before. He had watched the whole of Europe board trains in distress, across more decades than the railway itself had existed. But the woman stepping onto the platform at Calais in the grey January morning of 1887 was not in distress. She was in controlled fury, and that was a different matter entirely. She carried one valise, slightly too large for a single hand, and she carried it herself, refusing the porter who approached with the automatic deference his livery required. Her traveling dress was good wool, not fashionable wool. The cut was 3 seasons behind, but the fabric had been chosen by someone who understood quality, and the choosing had been done before the money ran out. She moved through the crowd the way someone moves who has learned, recently and painfully, that they cannot afford to be jostled. He knew her. That was the difficulty. He had not seen Constance Bellamy in 7 years. She had been Constance Hargrove then, daughter of the late Sir Edmund Hargrove of Devonshire, a young woman of 24, at a winter assembly in Brussels, where she had argued, with complete composure, that the restoration of Flemish altarpieces ought to follow the original pigment records, rather than the aesthetic preferences of contemporary patrons. She had been speaking to an elderly conservator who had not expected to be contradicted, and she had contradicted him with the particular certainty of someone who had done the reading. He had been standing close enough to hear, and he had not forgotten a word. He had not forgotten her face either, the way she held her opinions the way other women held flowers, as though they were hers to tend. She was 31 now, and something had been taken from her. He could see it in the set of her shoulders, which were straight but careful, the straightness of someone who had learned that slouching invited comment. He could see it in the valise, too small for a woman of her former position, and in the ticket she produced for the conductor with the swift, practiced gesture of someone who had learned to have documents ready before they were requested. She had learned, between Brussels and this platform, that the world did not wait for her. He did not approach her. He boarded the train. The compartment she chose was nearly empty. He chose the same one, because 7 years was long enough, and because he had a great deal of practice in the art of not explaining himself. She sat with her valise on her lap for the first quarter-hour, as the train pulled through the flat coastal fields and the light shifted from gray to a pale, watery gold. She was reading, or performing reading, he could not be certain, a small volume with a cracked spine that she handled with the automatic care of someone accustomed to books she could no longer replace. When she finally looked up, it was not with the surprise that most people performed when they noticed him. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been aware of for some time and have simply been deciding how to address. "Lord Vane," she said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, direct, unhurried, with the particular flatness of someone who had spent years in rooms where her opinions were not solicited and had learned to save her voice for when it mattered. "Miss Hargrove," he said, and then corrected himself, because he had done his reading too. "Forgive me, Mrs. Bellamy." "Not for much longer," she said, and returned to her book. He said nothing for a moment. Outside, the fields gave way to the first suggestion of low hills, and the train's rhythm settled into its long, patient cadence. "You are traveling alone," he said. "I am," she said, without looking up. "I find I prefer it." "To London?" "To wherever this train goes before London," she said. "I have not yet decided where I will stop." This was, he understood, not an invitation to continue the conversation. It was also not a dismissal, because she had not returned to her book with the pointed absorption that signals a closed door. She had lowered it slightly, resting it on the valise, and her eyes were on the window, and her expression was the expression of someone conducting an internal argument they have not yet resolved. "You were in Brussels," she said after a time. "7 years ago. You were standing behind me when I argued with Monsieur Delacroix about the Rubens restoration." "I was," he said. "You said nothing." "You were right," he said. There was nothing useful to add. She looked at him then, a long, direct look that took him in without performance. "You have not changed," she said. It was not a compliment and it was not an accusation. It was an observation, made with the same precision she had applied to the Flemish altarpieces, and it unsettled him more than either would have. "You have," he said. "Yes," she said simply, and that was all. The train carried them southeast, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have things to say and are deciding, separately, whether to say them. Her name, before Bellamy, had been Hargrove, and the Hargrove name had meant something in Devonshire, and in London, and in the better drawing-rooms of Brussels. Her father had been a man of cultivated tastes, and, it emerged after his death 4 years ago, cultivated debts. Debts that had been concealed with some skill and revealed with devastating timing, 3 months after Constance had married Geoffrey Bellamy, a solicitor of moderate prosperity and immoderate opinions about the proper conduct of wives. The Hargrove estate had gone to creditors. Constance had gone, in the way of women whose fathers die indebted and whose husbands are disappointed, into a kind of managed invisibility. She had sold her mother's pearls 18 months ago. She had told Geoffrey they had been lost. She had used the money to pay the wages of the 2 remaining servants, because Geoffrey had stopped paying them, and she could not bear to watch people work without recompense. This was the kind of thing she did not discuss. What she had sacrificed, specifically and without dramatics, was her reputation for honesty. She was known, among the small circle of people who still knew her, as a woman who had deceived her husband. The pearls were eventually traced, as things always are. And the story that circulated was not the true one. The story that circulated was that she had sold them to fund a correspondence with a man in Paris, which was not true, but was more interesting than the truth, and therefore more durable. Geoffrey had used it. He had used it with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for a usable grievance and was grateful to finally have one. She had left him this morning. She had packed the valise at 4 o'clock while he slept, and she had walked to the station, and she had bought a ticket on the first available train with the last of the money she had kept, in small amounts, in the lining of a winter coat he had never liked enough to touch. She had not told anyone. There was no one to tell. This was what Lord Vane did not know, sitting across from her in the train compartment, watching her read a book she was not reading. He knew the surface, the reduced dress, the single valise, the absence of a maid. He did not know the pearls, or the servants, or the coat lining, or the 4 o'clock departure. He did not know what it had cost her to sit here with her spine straight and her face composed, reading a book about Flemish painting in a train that was taking her somewhere she had not yet decided. He asked her, at Amiens, whether she had eaten. She said she was not hungry. He asked again at Abbeville, more specifically, describing the dining car and its particular merits. She said she had provisions. She did not have provisions. He knew she did not have provisions because she had not visited the platform vendors at Calais, and the valise was not shaped by anything edible, and she had the careful stillness of someone managing discomfort rather than reporting it. "Constance," he said. It was the first time he had used her Christian name, and he used it without apology, as though they had arrived at it together by some agreed route. "Will you come to the dining car?" It was not a question. She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched something move across her face. Not gratitude, not relief, but a complicated resistance. The resistance of someone who has trained herself not to need things from people. "I am not a charity case," she said. "I know exactly what you are," he said. "You are someone who argued a Flemish conservator into the ground at a Brussels assembly and was entirely correct to do so. Come to the dining car." She came. They ate, she ate, with the controlled appetite of someone who had been hungry for longer than this morning, and she told him nothing about Geoffrey, and he did not ask. He asked her about the book. She told him about the book. The book was a study of pigment degradation in 16th-century altarpieces, and she had opinions about it that she had apparently been storing for some time, and as she spoke, something in her face changed. The careful management fell away, and she was simply herself, animated by a subject she loved, and he watched this with the particular attention of someone who has waited a long time for something. "You disappeared," she said, between the soup and the fish course, without transition or preamble. "After Brussels, I looked for you at the subsequent assemblies. You were not there." He set down his fork. "I had to leave," he said. "Why?" He looked at her. "That is a longer answer than a dining car permits." "Then give me the shorter one." He was quiet for a moment. "There are things about my situation," he said carefully, "that make extended presence in one place inadvisable." "You are not ill," she said. It was not a question. She had been watching him with the same observational precision she applied to pigment records. "You have been in this compartment for 4 hours, and you have not eaten or drunk anything, and you do not appear to be suffering for it. Your hands are quite cold. I noticed when you passed me the bread. And you were at that Brussels assembly in December, and I remember thinking that you were the only person in the room who did not appear to feel the cold." He looked at her for a long moment. "You noticed all of that," he said. "I notice details," she said. "It is what I do. I notice things other people decide are not important." She picked up her fork. "You do not need to explain yourself tonight. But I want you to know that I am not easily frightened, and I am not easily deceived, and whatever it is you are not saying, I am capable of hearing it when you are ready to say it." He said nothing, but something in his face, the careful neutrality he had worn for longer than she had been alive, shifted slightly, not much, but enough. They returned to the compartment as the light outside went fully dark, and the train moved through the French countryside with its patient, mechanical certainty, and she slept eventually, with her cheek against the window and her book held loosely in her lap. And he did not sleep because he did not sleep, and he watched the dark fields pass and thought about 7 years and what they had cost each of them. He had left Brussels because of her. This was the part he had not said. He had stood behind her at the assembly and listened to her argue about altarpieces and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the particular danger of wanting something he could not have without explaining what he was. He had left because the alternative was staying, and staying would have meant a conversation he was not prepared to have. 7 years later, on a train from Calais, she had told him she had looked for him at subsequent assemblies, and the information sat in him like a stone. She woke at the Belgian border, composed, as though she had not been asleep. "You were going to tell me something," she said, without opening her eyes fully. "Was I?" "You were deciding whether to," she said. "You had the look of someone doing arithmetic." He was quiet for a moment. The border crossing required the presentation of documents, and he produced his with the efficiency of someone who had done it many times, and the officer who examined them looked at the name and the title and the seal and handed them back with a small bow. Constance produced her own documents with the same swift practicality she had shown at Calais. She was not using Bellamy's name. She was using Hargrove. He noticed this. "You have already decided something," he said. "Several things," she said. "The first is that I am not going back. The second is that I am going to find work. I have some knowledge of painting restoration, not professional training, but enough to be useful as an assistant or a researcher. The third is that I am going to stop apologizing for the pearls." "What pearls?" She looked at him. Then, with the deliberate calm of someone who has decided to trust a person and is doing it consciously rather than accidentally, she told him. The pearls, the servants, the coat lining, the story that Geoffrey had used. She told it without self-pity and without drama, in the same tone she used to discuss pigment records. "This is what happened. This is what it cost. This is where we are now." When she finished, he was very still. "He told people," he said, "that you sold them for a correspondence with a man in Paris." "Yes." "And the actual reason?" the servants' wages, was known to no one. To the servants, she said, who are no longer employed there, and who have no reason to speak, and who would not be believed in any case. The stillness in him was not the stillness of shock. It was the stillness of someone controlling a response that would not be useful if released. She watched him with the curiosity of someone who catalogues details, and she saw his hands, which were resting on his knees, press flat, very deliberately, against the fabric of his trousers. "Geoffrey Bellamy," he said, "is a solicitor." "Yes." "He has clients." "Lord Vane?" "He has a professional reputation that depends on his character being considered unimpeachable." "What are you thinking?" she said, and her voice had an edge to it. "I am thinking," he said, "that I know 3 members of the Law Society's disciplinary committee, and that a solicitor who fabricates grounds for marital separation in order to protect himself from the consequences of his own failure to pay household staff is not a man whose character is, in fact, unimpeachable." "That is not your decision," she said. He looked at her. "No," he said after a moment, "it is not." The train reached Brussels before dawn. He had been to Brussels a great many times. He knew the station, the particular smell of coal smoke and river water, the way the gas lamps on the platform turned the darkness amber. He stepped onto the platform and she stepped beside him, and he said without planning to, "There is someone I should like you to meet, if you are willing to stay for a day." She considered this. "Who?" "An old friend," he said. She knows things about painting restoration. She has contacts in the field. She could be useful to you." "And useful to you, in some way, to introduce us?" He smiled then. A real smile, not the managed social expression he had worn for most of the evening. "You are very difficult to maneuver," he said. "I have had a great deal of practice at being maneuvered," she said. "I have become resistant to it." The old friend was a woman named Countess Elspeth Vray, who was not, technically, a countess in any living court, because she had been what she was for longer than most courts had existed. She received them in a house on the Rue des Sablons that smelled of beeswax and old paper, and she looked at Constance with the particular attention of someone who has met a great many people and has learned to identify quickly which of them are worth her time. "She is the one from Brussels," Elspeth said to Vane, not troubling to lower her voice. "Yes," he said. "You left Brussels because of her," Elspeth said, with the comfortable directness of someone who has known a person for centuries and has no patience for his evasions. "And now you have brought her here. What has changed?" "Everything," he said. Elspeth looked at Constance. "He has not told you what he is," she said. "He has not," Constance said, "but I have formed some hypotheses." Elspeth's expression shifted into something that was almost, but not quite, delight. "Has she?" she said to Vane. "I like her." It was Elspeth who told her, in the end, not because Vane was unwilling, but because Constance asked her directly, woman to woman, in the kitchen while Vane was in the library, and Elspeth was the kind of person who answered direct questions directly. She told her what he was, what it meant, what it did not mean. She told her that he had not fed on any person in longer than Constance's grandmother had been alive. She told her that he had spent those decades being quietly, stubbornly useful, funding restorations, protecting documents, keeping things intact that the world kept trying to destroy. "He left Brussels," Elspeth said, pouring tea she did not intend to drink herself, "because he was afraid. He is very old and very careful, and he has learned not to want things, because wanting things leads to staying in places, and staying in places leads to people noticing that he does not age." She set down the pot. "He is also, when he permits himself to be, a person of considerable warmth. You have apparently reminded him of that." "He tried to arrange something," Constance said, "with the Law Society regarding my husband." "Did he?" Elspeth's tone was neutral. "Without asking me." Ah, Elspeth said. I need you to understand, Constance said, that I am not angry because I don't want Geoffrey held to account. I am angry because the decision of whether and how to do it belongs to me. I am the one who sold the pearls. I am the one who paid those wages. Whatever comes of that is mine to direct. Elspeth looked at her for a long moment. Go and tell him that, she said. He will hear it better from you than from me. She found him in the library, standing at the window with his back to the room, and she did not give him the courtesy of a preamble. You contacted the Law Society, she said. He turned. His expression told her that he had been expecting this conversation and had not been looking forward to it. I sent a letter, he said. This morning from the station. I know a man on the committee. I told him what I knew. Without asking me. Yes. Do you understand, she said, what you have done? Not to Geoffrey. I am not concerned with Geoffrey, but to me. I made a choice. I chose to pay those wages. I chose to keep quiet about the reason. I chose to leave this morning at 4 o'clock. Those were my choices, made with the information I had, and they are mine. When you go to the Law Society without consulting me, you are telling me that my choices are a problem to be solved, rather than a life being lived. He was very still. The library smelled of old leather and something older, cedar, and something her tongue had no word for, something that was simply his particular presence in a room. You are right, he said. She had been prepared for argument. The simple agreement disarmed her. I am right, she said, holding her ground. Yes, he said. I am. I have been doing this for a very long time. Arranging things. Quietly from a distance, because it is safer than being present, and because I have told myself it is a form of care. He looked at her with the directness she was coming to recognize as his particular honesty. It is also a form of control, and I did not examine that distinction carefully enough. She stood with this for a moment. The letter, she said. Can it be recalled? It cannot, he said. It will reach the committee by tomorrow. Then we have a problem, she said. Because Geoffrey will know it came from somewhere. He will look for the source. And if he finds it leads back to you, and through you to me, he will use it. He will say I orchestrated a campaign against him through a titled patron, which will be far more damaging to me than the Pearl story. Vane's expression changed. I had not considered that. No, she said. You had not. She sat down because she needed to think, and she thought better sitting. He remained standing with the particular patience of someone who has learned to wait. The committee member, she said. What did your letter say precisely? He told her. She was quiet for a moment, turning it over. It is vague enough, she said finally. It does not name me. It raises questions about his conduct in general terms. If I am careful, if I approach this correctly, I can ensure that any investigation proceeds through channels that do not lead back to this conversation. How? He said. Because I know someone on the committee, she said. My father was at school with Arthur Fenwick, and Fenwick has been on the Law Society board for 15 years, and I wrote to him 6 months ago about an entirely different matter, the settlement of my father's estate, and he wrote back, and we have a correspondence. She looked at Vane. If I write to Fenwick directly, as myself, as a woman with specific documented knowledge of my husband's conduct, my letter becomes the primary instrument. Your letter becomes background noise. The investigation proceeds on my terms, through my testimony, and Geoffrey cannot claim I acted through a proxy because I acted myself. He looked at her for a long moment. You have been planning this, he said. I have been thinking about it, she said. For approximately 6 months. I was not certain I was brave enough to act on it. This morning I became certain. She met his eyes. Your letter was not nothing. It may have opened the door. But I am the one who is going to walk through it, and I am going to do it on my own 2 feet. Yes, he said. You are. There was something in his voice, Not admiration exactly, which would have been condescending, but a kind of recognition. The recognition of someone seeing a thing clearly for the first time and finding it exactly what they had hoped. Elspeth provided paper and ink, and Constance wrote to Arthur Fenwick that afternoon, at the desk in the library, while Vane read and did not look over her shoulder, which she noted and appreciated. The letter was 3 pages. It was precise, documented, and calm. It was the letter of a woman who had been waiting for the right moment and had decided, on a train from Calais, that the right moment was now. She sealed it herself. The response from Fenwick came 4 days later, because she had stayed, not because Vane had asked her to, but because Elspeth had offered her the use of the house's considerable library, and the library contained 3 monographs on Flemish pigment analysis that she had been trying to locate for 2 years. She worked in the mornings. She walked in the afternoons, through the winter streets of Brussels, relearning the city she had known at 24. Vane walked with her sometimes, when she permitted it, and they talked about painting, about history, about the particular quality of winter light in northern cities, about things that were not Geoffrey or the Law Society or the letter in Fenwick's hands. He told her about the centuries. Not all of them. There were too many, and some were not stories for winter afternoons, but pieces. The things he had watched change, the things that had not changed, the loneliness of it, which he described without self-pity, in the same way she had described the pearls. This is what it is. This is what it costs. This is where we are. Does it frighten you? He asked her one afternoon on the bridge over the canal, where the water was the color of pewter and the bare trees made a pattern against the pale sky that she was already composing in her mind as a study in line. No, she said. Then, honestly, a little. Not you, the idea of it, the length of it. She looked at the water. I have spent 4 years in a small life. The length of yours is difficult to comprehend from inside a small life. Your life is not small, he said. It has been, she said. I am working on changing that. Fenwick's letter was careful and formal, and confirmed that the matter she had raised would be examined by the appropriate subcommittee, and that her documented account would be treated as primary testimony, and that she would be kept informed of proceedings. It was everything she had asked for, delivered in the measured language of institutional process, and she read it twice, and then set it on the desk, and put her hands flat on the surface and breathed. Elspeth appeared in the doorway. Well, she said. It is proceeding, Constance said. Good, Elspeth said. Where is Vane? In the garden, Constance said. He said the light was better there this morning. Elspeth made a sound that was not quite a laugh. He has been standing in that garden at this hour every morning since you arrived, she said. He does not particularly care about the light. He can see perfectly well in the dark. Constance looked at her. He is waiting, Elspeth said, with the patience of someone who has watched this particular performance before across more years than she intended to count, to see whether you will come out. She went out. He was standing at the far end of the garden, where a stone bench sat under a bare wisteria, and the winter morning had the particular sharp clarity that comes after frost, and the air smelled of cold stone and distant coal smoke and something green and persistent underneath it all, the smell of things that were not dead but dormant. He turned when he heard her footsteps on the gravel, and his face did the thing she had been watching it do for 4 days. The careful neutrality gave way slightly to something warmer and less managed. Fenwick's letter, she said. Yes? It is proceeding, she said. On my terms. He nodded. He did not say I told you so, or I am glad, or anything that would have been the wrong thing. He said, What do you want to do now? She looked at him. The question was larger than it appeared. She understood that. He understood that she understood it. I want to finish the monograph on Van Eyck's ground preparation, she said, and I want to write to the restoration workshop in Ghent that Elspeth mentioned about the assistant position, and I want— She stopped. Yes, he said. I want to know, she said, whether you intend to disappear again, because I looked for you at 3 subsequent assemblies, and I should like not to spend another 7 years doing that. He was quiet for a moment. The wisteria above the bench was bare and intricate against the sky, 100 years of growth made visible in the pattern of its branches. I left, he said, because I was afraid of what it would mean to stay. I am still afraid of what it means. He looked at her with the directness that was his particular honesty. But I am more afraid of what it would mean to leave again, now that I know you looked. She considered this. It was not a declaration of eternal devotion. It was something more useful. A man telling the truth about his fear and choosing to stay in spite of it. Then stay, she said. But if you make decisions about my life again without asking me, I will write you a letter that makes the one to Fenwick look gentle. He almost smiled. I believe you. Good, she said. She sat on the stone bench. After a moment, he sat beside her. The garden was cold and bright, and somewhere beyond the wall, Brussels was going about its morning business, the clatter of carts on cobblestones, the distant bells of a church marking the hour, the smell of bread from the bakery 2 streets over. She had a letter to write to Ghent, and a monograph to finish, and a legal proceeding to monitor, and a life to rebuild from the foundation up. These were not small things. They were, in fact, the architecture of everything she intended to become. He did not take her hand. He simply sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the particular coolness of his presence, which she had catalogued on the first day and filed under. Real, and not frightening, and mine to decide what to do with. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a small pencil and the back of Fenwick's letter, and she began to sketch the wisteria. The bare branches, the way they held the light, the 100 years of patient growth made visible in their pattern. You draw, he said, looking at what was appearing on the paper. I observe, she said. Drawing is how I record it. He watched her hand move across the paper, and she was aware of him watching, and she did not stop. She drew the wisteria, and the bench, and the line of the wall, and then, because she was a woman who recorded what she saw, she drew his hands, resting on his knees, long-fingered, still, carrying the particular patience of something that has endured, and she held the sketch out to him without comment. He looked at it for a long time. You see things very clearly, he said. I always have, she said. I simply had to stop apologizing for it. He handed the sketch back to her. She tucked it into the pocket of her coat, beside the pencil and the folded letter, and they sat together in the cold, bright morning, and the bells marked the hour again, and the wisteria held its bare branches against the sky with the composure of something that knows spring is coming and is in no particular hurry, because it has been here long enough to know that it always does.